Time now for our rants and raves of the week, starting with Dan.
I have a rant for the administration of Indiana Governor Mike Pence, who this week announced that they were going to have an in-house State House news service called Just In for Indiana. And the idea was that they were going to actually use taxpayer money to compete with the local media. They talk about actually breaking stories. Now, the reason I gave the rant to the administration is that Governor Pence claims he didn't even know about it until he read about it in the Indianapolis Star. And one of the great headlines was in the Atlantic calling it Pravda on the Plains, which I think is great. But he said, no, we're not going to do this. It would have cost the state $100,000. Fortunately, the governor shut it down.
Well, whose plan was it?
Well, it's somebody in his administration, and he ought to figure out how this reached the point where it made it into the paper, and he had to step in and shut it down because it's ridiculous, it's offensive, and it was expensive.
If you think the governor wasn't briefed on a major communications initiative like that or behind it, then I've got a bridge to sell you.
Well, if he wasn't, there should be some heads rolling very soon.
Mm-hmm. So I'm going next. Something that we follow every year, the Washington Post, Chris Cizillo puts out a list every year. He has a blog, whatever he calls it, The Fix. Anyway, he does the best political reporters in every state in the country. And this year, 8 people were named from Massachusetts, which was wonderful, including, of course, our own John Keller, who appears here regularly, David Bernstein, who works with us also for Boston Magazine, Janet Wu from Channel 5, Scott Lehigh, Frank Phillips, and Allison King from NECN. It was really a mark, because some states only had 1 or 2 people, and I contend we could have had even more on our list, including our very own Adam Riley.
Hey, thanks. No, there's a lot of great people.
Yeah,
tons of them.
It was great people.
Jim O'Sullivan from
and it was nice to see they went out into the away from Boston to pick a few people as well.
Yeah, I mean it's quite an honorable, an honor to be on that list. So. All right, and Dante, you want to follow up with that?
Yeah, sure. Speaking of State House reporters, on Thursday, House Democrats convened on Beacon Hill to eliminate term limits for House Speaker Bob DeLeo, and they meant to do it behind closed doors. But reporters Garrett Quinn of Mass Live and Gin Dumchus of State House News Service, neither of whom was on that list, but both good reporters, to their credit, insisted that it was a public meeting and said that there was no reason that they should leave. This turned into a scene. A court officer came to the reporters and said to them, "Why can't you be a, expletive deleted, gentleman?" Secrecy ultimately prevailed. The lawmakers there, to make their meeting kosher, ended up voting the meeting closed, and so the reporters were forced out. But nevertheless, Quinn and Dumchus had performed a public service, reminding the legislature that they have to follow the public records law, whether they think it's gentlemanly or not.
Yeah, it was fantastic.
It was terrific. I loved it.
Yeah, what was the big secret anyway?
Everybody knew what they were going to do.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's opacity for opacity's sake, just because we can, because that's the way we want it, I think.
All right, Josh.
I have a rave for the blogging career of Andrew Sullivan, who announced this week that would be coming to a close. Andrew Sullivan, who has worked at, I think, every major national political news outlet at some point or another, at Time, at The Atlantic, at The Daily Beast, the New Republic, where he was the editor in the 90s, was one of the very early converts in the traditional media world to blogging back in the late 1990s, and really brought it mainstream in a really significant way. This week, he announced that he was tired, basically, after doing this for something like 14 years straight, and he wanted to step away and spend more time with his family. That's sort of a thing. You try blogging every single day, 20 times a day for 14 years. You can agree or disagree with Andrew Sullivan on any number of issues. There are plenty of things that I would disagree with him about, but nonetheless, it's a career that has shown a lot of success and been an important factor in bringing more of a digital perspective into the mainstream media.
No, I'm a big fan. So will he go back into doing some other long form? Or?
He says he wants to write a book and do some things that have a slightly slower pace, as well as, I think, just cutting back on his work more broadly.
Well, I'm not a fan, but I agree with you that he was an important pioneer in digital media.
Yeah.
Adam.
All right, with apologies to Josh, who's a Harvard employee, and Dante, who I believe is a Harvard alumnus, I want to rant about coverage of the annual Hasty Pudding Awards. Amy Poehler was in town recently. She was the beneficiary of the wackiness This time around, this is actually, I think it's a non-event that deserves absolutely no coverage, but it is only one of many that we feel obligated to cover again and again. On my list, I would include the Santa Speedo Run, which doesn't only happen here in Boston, but we act like it's some sort of big, unique deal when it's not. The Pantsless Tea Ride, not a fan of that one either. And Emily, I know I
don't like the L Street brownies.
Yep.
Puxatawny Phil. Why do we even mention that? What
That's
is
a great
What's
question.
wrong with us?
I don't know.
The newspapers are cover every. It's like, why? It's just ridiculous.
And we already put Donald Trump on the list.
Well, Donald Trump is on the list. That's true. His quadrennial foray into presidential
I had
politics.
a very long list.
Now,
I don't even have time to get into it.
Do you guys? Am I being too harsh on the hasty putting awards here?
No, I agree with you.
No?
Non-event.
It's a nice
Excellent.
entertainment.
Yeah. Oh. None of us get invited. All right, that is it for our show. Tell us what you think. Is Donald Trump legitimate news or a sideshow? Is criticism of a deceased Navy SEAL crossing a line? Weigh in on our website, beatthepress.org. You can also watch any shows you may have missed